It's time now for Countywide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Kyle Benedict as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives in Yavapai County. And now here's today's Countywide.
Force.
Glad to be here.
We're talking use of force, and I read the, let's start with that. I read the wiki definition of use of force, and you agreed with it. It's the context of law enforcement may be defined as the amount of effort required by police to compel compliance by an unwilling subject. Let me start here. When an officer pulls up to a scene, I would think if I was a police officer today, if I wore your uniform and I had the gun and everything, I think everything I would pull up to, I would assume is going to become possibly life-threatening to me.
Yeah, and they're trained, police officers are generally trained to make that assumption in the police academy, where they've got to assume, they can't assume that someone is not going to hurt you. The assumption has to be on the other side, because policing is very dynamic. Officers are wearing uniforms, they're driving more cars typically, and they're being infused in situations where they don't have a full understanding of what's going on. So caution is the rule of the game.
I mean, you're never called to a pleasant scene.
Usually, yeah, we're part
Right?
of someone's worst day.
Right,
yes.
right. If I call 911, it's because there's something going on in my world right now that is affecting me personally, and I need some help.
Right.
So I expect you to be there as quick as you can, and you ought to be prepared for whatever it is that's going on in my world.
Correct.
Okay.
That's certainly ideally where we'd want to be, and that's certainly the public's expectation.
So what about the public that says you should show up with this open mind that there's going to be nothing wrong and everything should be okay?
Well, that's simply not realistic, and it's proven itself, time again. And again, we're focusing on facts and logic and history on what we know. And and officers, first of all, there should be recognition that these men and women in uniform are choosing to, enter an occupation where their personal safety is absolutely at risk, and they're going to risk their life to conceivably save someone that they don't know. And it doesn't matter who it is, someone that they don't know, and risk, again, their family's welfare at the same time. And I think lost in some of the national narrative, which is driven by many factors we talked about last show, in my opinion, we're almost to a certain extent dehumanizing police officers and kind of just dismissing that fact that these are public servants that are infusing themselves in very dangerous situations. So, from the public's perspective, we talked about, well, how do we avoid some of these situations? And if you look at a lot of the incidents that occur across the United States, that many of which garner the media's attention, there's a commonality between almost all of them. Is when there's contact by the police generally are called there. In most instances, we're called. There are certainly situations where the officer's proactive and encounters someone, but many times we're called there. There's information that's fed to the officer over the radio through the dispatch from a witness.
A limited amount of information as well. Right,
which is usually missing from the contextual picture that's presented by the media. Is that information is it's just not there many times. So they're already predisposed to whatever it is, and it may or may not be accurate. And the officers know that. It may or not. The person may be, he may have a gun. And the person may not have a gun, but they have to assume that this person is armed. So they're going to talk to them in a way that's very authoritative and make sure that, they're going to give them commands. And this is the crux of how many situations spiral out of control. Is there, for whatever reason, there's a lack of deference to the police officer's lawful commands or orders in the beginning. And then everything spirals out of control because the officer now cannot control that situation, and the assumption, which is again, the safe assumption is that this person intends to cause them harm. When an individual refuses to comply with simple commands such as, sit down, show me your hands, take your hands out of your pocket, those types of commands, or trying to identify someone that they have reasonable suspicion to detain.
Why not just back away from it?
Well, and that's, we're at a point where some people are suggesting that.
I know, I've heard that.
Yeah, and we're a society that's based on law and order, and realistically, and again, this is just one man's opinion, as soon as we create an edict that says, hey, if someone resists, we're going to just withdraw and back away, the credibility of the American justice system will fail at that point, and quite frankly, our neighborhoods and communities will suffer greatly because you've just delegitimized the police, and that's kind of what's been going on regardless. But as soon as that happens, that will give particularly individuals that have no qualms about doing harm to others and victimizing their neighbor, it will give them license to do what they want to do, and it certainly is not in society's best interest to do that. It just doesn't make sense. What makes sense is we are a rule of law society. Without that rule of law, we are the fabric of what makes us a great state, great country, great city, great community falls apart. So there's got to be a societal expectation that people listen to lawful orders by the men and women that are putting themselves on the line to protect our communities.
Think we can cover body cameras in 2.5 minutes before a break?
No.
No. Okay, so we shouldn't go there. All right, well then let's take our break right now. We'll take it a little bit early, and we'll come back. We're going to talk. I still want to talk body cameras with you, which we haven't even touched on yet.
Sure.
And we want to talk about proper procedures for me as a civilian. If a law enforcement officer approaches me, what am I supposed to be doing? So, Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gesell in studio today. We're talking use of force. Stick around, county-wide, back in just a couple minutes.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
They said I couldn't dream. Called me a piece of trash and swore that's all I'd ever be. Said a bottle couldn't see the ocean. Give up. Go back to the dumpster. But I didn't listen. I made my way. And now, I am what I've always wanted to be.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Welcome back to Countywide. We're talking use of force with Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gesell, who agreed to stick around and record another show with me. Body cameras. We couldn't hit them before the break, so I want to make sure we jump in right now because that's definitely one thing you wanted to talk about. They've come into play heavily. I mean, it was the dash cam, but not every car had them.
Right.
And actually, I had Sheriff Masher in here, I want to say a couple of years ago. He was talking about the body cameras, and at that time it was like, okay, how many officers wear them? When do we turn them on? When do we turn them off? How do we store the material? Who's going to pay for the storage? And all that was going on at the time. So obviously body cameras are here to stay because it's actually, I think, protecting the officers as well as the public too.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And, there's certainly been a push as of late in some communities, to actually legislate that all officers have them when they turn them on, and certainly that legislation has appeared in the state of Arizona as well. It was not successful, but law enforcement in general, it's a new technology, relatively new. And with new technology, there's a learning curve. There's bugs that have to be worked out. There's products that are put online that aren't fully fleshed out, in their functionality, and
Sure, I just had a computer update did the same thing.
Right.
There's always a little bit of a glitch here and there.
So, but I would like to say that the most staunchest advocates of body-worn cameras were the police, and we were advocates when the technology started coming out. Prior to some of the dialogue that you see across the nation of this insistence that police wear them, we knew that they were valuable, and it's been accepted in police culture that the departments that have brought that technology on board, because the reality is statistics show that it improves interactions between particularly citizens that may or may not be combative. But certainly it also improves the officer's interaction as well, because everything, well, not everything, and I'd like to get to that, but the encounter is being memorialized on that device. And that has resulted in dramatic reductions in citizen complaints on police officers many times. And I've had them here where we've got them and we roll the tape and the complaint does not match what's on tape, and it's exonerated the officer from rude behavior and certainly other complaints, which is probably our most frequent, is that the officer was rude to me and he said this and that, and then we roll the tape and it doesn't really reflect that. So it helps officers, and officers embrace that technology. There are some hurdles, which the sheriff mentioned to you, is there's storage is a big issue for the data storage, and then what's available via a public records request. And that's where we're seeing the concern by some in the community, and me personally, is I see body-worn cameras footage being released to the media edits it, and they spit it out, and they throw it out, and it's lacking that context. Because these are one piece of evidence, as we've seen in a couple of these high-profile shootings across the nation. It doesn't many times give you the full picture, and it's one piece of evidence that has to be taken relative to the body of evidence when we evaluate whether a use of force, particularly taking a human's life, was justified or not. And there's now seemingly this public expectation or rush to judgment in many cases by what people are seeing on television, which is many times condensed by some in the media to, in some instances, to sensationalize the
Pieces
event.
are missing.
Correct. I just watched one this morning where I had questions that were not answered.
My wife, for instance, has come up to me numerous times and says, "Oh, I just saw this on Twitter. This was tweeted out. This," and she's telling me what somebody heard on a scanner, and then they're putting that out on a tweet. And what I find is that she's seen this, but I got this press release that said this, which is a far more complete story,
Right.
and that's the story I put on the air. But what I see happening is that this has already been fed into here.
Right.
I'm not paying attention to what I see anymore about this, but this is what I'm telling you and you and you and
Right.
you, which is this inaccurate information. And that's why I've always here even with Kyle, it's like, no, let's wait till we get the whole thing. I know everybody wants to be first, but I think we should wait until we get the whole thing and then put the story out. So that's what I see the issue with the social media right now, is that it's just these bits and pieces, and it's not a whole thing, and people kind of tend to fabricate the pieces in between.
I would agree with that, and I've, my experience has been throughout my career, the story from that you would get from a citizen about what they perceived or what they heard a police encounter was generally doesn't match, and there are instances where it does, and that's the mindset as a police administrator that you have to have. Is every time someone's alleges police misconduct, we have to assume, at least that the impetus of that, I'm using that word today, that's my $5 word.
I like
impetus.
it a lot.
But we have to assume that that's certainly possible or plausible that there was misconduct, and that's what we take every single complaint that we get from the public. We'll take that and we will look into it, even as wild as it may seem. I will tell you that in my career, a couple of times those wild assertions fleshed out to be true. Very, very much on it's not very common. I'm spacing out there for a second.
It's okay.
Very, very uncommon that in my experience, where that would be validated through the evidence. But you're right, and what's changed in today's society is that narrative is put out there now. It's supercharged. So before it was, you talk to a couple people, that would come, and then we would respond to it, to those couple people. Now you have, the national media putting out incidents that are highly charged, highly dynamic, lacking context, and then you have the narrative on social media that springs before the police chief even gets a call. That narrative is already in play.
This first narrative lacks a lot of facts, and then we can come back, new reports indicate new. Well,
Right.
By the time you get down here, the 20th new report, people are still back here on this first report, and actually sometimes they don't care about any of this, so it gets lost. We got to move on. Let's move on to something else.
Sounds
That's
good.
body cameras. Okay, body cameras have been a big help, and I hope they all have body cameras. I think this is kind of a black and white subject, but we want to make sure we hit this before we hit a break here in just a few minutes. If I get pulled over, I feel like if Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gesell pulls me over on the side of the road and you start telling me what to do, it should be pretty simple that as long as I do what Chief Gesell tells me to do, I'm going to be okay, and I'm not going to have a bump or bruise or a mug shot or, get shot or anything else going to happen to me. So you tell me, I get pulled over, what should I be doing?
Well, it's important to understand the officer's mindset, which is what we talked about. They have no idea what they're coming up on, and many people say, well, it's me, I would never hurt anyone.
Expect the worst, I would imagine.
And we understand that, but the officer doesn't, and they don't know what they're dealing with. And just starting off with that understanding that this officer, he doesn't know if this is going to be a gunfight or, you'll be best friends by the end of this contact. He just doesn't know. He or she doesn't know. So it's very important, imperative that people listen to lawful commands from the officer. Certainly before the officer comes up, if it's a traffic stop, we always advise people, put your hands on the wheel, because they're looking for movement. They're looking for your hands to be going places, either secreting something or grabbing potentially a weapon is what's going to go through their mind. So we don't want to move around in the car. We want to keep our hands on the steering wheel. We want to roll our window down, and we want to engage the officer and listen to what they have to say.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Plain and simple.
And then it's a good day, usually, for everybody. If you don't have warrants for your arrest and stuff like that, you're going to be in your car, you get a ticket or a warning, and off you go. Right? I remember a day when I could get out of my vehicle and walk back towards the officer and have a conversation.
Yeah,
and that changed.
Yeah, that's
that surprised me, because I don't get pulled over very often. I try not to get pulled over very often.
Yeah, we don't advise anyone to get out of their cars, particularly in today's society. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of officers that the fight has been brought to them, and that certainly will create some concern on the officer's part. So just stay in your car if it's a traffic stop again. Stay in your car, nothing aggressive, just keep your hands visible.
You show up at my house, what should I be doing there?
Kind of same element, although, with your house you have more of standing. It just depends on the circumstances. Certainly there's not opportunities, but there's legal precedents for when the officers can enter your residence without a warrant, and one of those is a public safety exception, where if someone calls 911, it's a domestic call, that the officers have the ability to enter to make sure everyone's okay, and that's where the legal authority ends. They don't have legal authority to start searching. But listening to what they have to say, and even if you believe say you don't think that the officers have the right to come into your domicile there to ensure the public safety, or you're not aware of that exception, listen to what the officer says. And if you have any concerns, you still, as long as you believe that it's not something completely off the chart, which you're generally going to get in the movies and not in reality, but listen to the lawful order. And if you have concerns or questions, call and ask for a supervisor, because the supervisors will come out and they'll listen to what you have to say. And like I said, we take police misconduct very, very seriously. There's very few occupations that are internally scrutinized more than American police.
Let's take a break. Steve Gesell in studio today, Cottonwood Police Chief. Their number there is 634-4246. This is Countywide. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Me and my boy Matt had it good. He had catnip that was off the hook. But one day, he brings a girl home, and she's allergic to cats. Every sneeze was a nail in my coffin. Now I'm in a shelter. It's decent, but they don't even have Wi-Fi.
I'm Jenny Garth, and as a mother of 3, I know kids worry about a lot of things. Getting enough food to eat shouldn't be one of them. But here in America, that is a real worry for 1 in 5 children. Even though we are one of the most food-rich countries in the world, 15 million children don't know where their next meal is coming from. This is unacceptable, and something the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks is working to solve. Instead of accepting that our country lets billions of pounds of surplus food go to waste every year, Feeding America has made it their mission to help families in need by rescuing this food. Through food pantries and meal programs, the nationwide network of food banks provides more than 3 billion meals, serving virtually every community in the United States, including yours. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank by visiting feedingamerica.org. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back to Countywide. We've got just a smidgen of time left with Cottonwood Police Chief Steve Gesell. We've done 2 shows now talking about the use of force. One other thing I wanted to get to, and we didn't get to it. You hear a lot of reports about people are like, well, maybe police officers should no longer have guns. You've got your pepper spray, you got your tasers. You guys should be armed with beanbag guns. That's less lethal. You're just going to knock me out with that. Right. I've even heard people say, why don't you just shoot the gun out of their hand? Like you guys are all and gals are from the Wild West, and you're just these dead aim shots. Sure. It just all sounds unreasonable to me, because I think if I was a police officer and somebody pulled a gun out and aimed it at me, I'd be darned if I'm not going to stick a gun back and try to save my life. Sure. As Jackie McConnell, commander from Cavalry Marshal's office, says, she says, I've got a child and I got a husband at home, and I want to go home to them at night, and you want to go home to your family at night, and you're people just like us. Right. Yeah. So I keep telling you, I feel like it's black and white, but it's not. There's a whole lot of gray anymore, it seems like, on the topic. But for those folks that doubt what the police officer's job is and how it's done, I think we should encourage them to take the Cottonwood Citizens Academy.
Absolutely.
Or any law enforcement academy.
Sure. And again, going back to the, it's almost become cliche in my business, but that transparency is extremely important. And you'll see Cottonwood is like many other departments. We have a number of programs that increase the opportunity for our citizens to see how and why we do things. The Citizens Academy is one of them. We have people that will enroll in our Citizens Academy 2 and 3 times, which I've never seen that before. That's certainly indicative of a community that really supports its police department. But what we're lacking are the critics, and that's who I'd really like to invite to go, regardless of what community you live in. If you have serious doubts or questions that need to be answered, take advantage of those types of programs and enroll and ask those difficult questions. And that is the forum where, if you're truly interested in the response and facts and logic that agency relies upon to make those decisions, that's where you can get those answers in short order and perhaps gain that additional perspective. But at the end of the day, again, this is an extremely supportive community. We value that immensely. There's always going to be a segment of any community where they have ulterior motive or self-interest that is going to, it's going to, quite frankly, put up a barrier where they're not interested in that facts and logic. And we understand that, but we certainly want to do everything we can to reach out to the public and offer that opportunity to everybody.
All right, Chief, thank you so much for coming in and spending so much time with me.
All right, no problem. It's always a pleasure.
That is today's Countywide. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We will talk to you again next time.